While in medical school, I heard a missionary share an unforgettable message. He said, "When I entered the Zambezi Valley, I saw the smoke of 1,000 fires. I learned that no one in that valley had ever heard that Jesus Christ had died for them." In 2007, I began helping in a new country. I was told by a reliable source that there were no known Christians in that country. Shortly thereafter, one of the medical students commented to me, "We have never met a Christian." It is reported that about 29,000 children die every day, most of these of preventable diseases, diarrhea, pneumonia, worms. Of the 29,000, I think 13,000 die in Africa every day. In many parts of Africa, children who are born with an overt disability, these children are hidden. They're ashamed to their parents, they're ashamed of their village, they're ashamed of their country. And sometimes, even in newspapers today in Kenya, they'll say, well, all of a sudden they've found a child who's 12 years old that the neighbors didn't even know existed. And most of these will come out and have been hidden so long that many times the damage is so great, there's not a lot to do for them. There's a lot of stigma attached with disabilities in this country. The work with disabled kids in Africa is extremely neglected. The work done in Kenya is probably the best in sub-Saharan Africa, except for possibly South Africa. And the work here is still very, very poor. Many of these mothers or fathers have taken their child to the local dispensary, the local hospital, the provincial hospital, and have already been told that there's nothing to be done.
For the child who has a disability from a poor family, there's pretty well no access. The only place in the country, and in every country more or less, where there's a hope for some surgery is in the National Referral Hospital. But the waiting time, for example, for spina bifida, is between 3 and 6 months. And really what happens is that 2/3 of those will die.
The real thing we need right now in this segment of our history is people with some special skills. Before I ever found the lady I married, before I ever began my career, I felt that God was directing me towards being a medical missionary. Good morning, Christine. How are you? 1982, my wife and I and our twins, who were then 5, visited a home for disabled children. Actually, it was a hostel for disabled children. And there were about 75 children. The nurse, who was a Scottish nurse, gave us Scottish shortbread and tea, and then she took us on a tour, and then she asked that fateful question, "Can you help us?" We said, "We will try." And so that was the beginning. While in 1982 we had essentially no rehab work here at Kajabi, it began. And it grew slowly, and it was initially polio. Slowly it became club feet, burn contractures, and cleft lips. And then eventually, probably the last one to add on, is the neurological work with children with hydrocephalus, or what is commonly known as water on the brain, or spina bifida, a defect in the spinal cord. Many times I took a book, and particularly books on club feet, into the operating room. And they sat right beside the table, and I would at times get to a certain stage and I'd turn to the nurse in the operating room and say, "Could you turn to the next page?" And we'd go on from there. And that's a hard way to learn. That's not a way I'd recommend. But at that time, there was nobody hardly doing any work with disabled children in this country. In the West, at the time of my training, most general surgeons were taught to do things like abdominal explorations and gastrectomies, taking out somebody's stomach, or doing intestinal problems, sometimes mastectomies for breast cancer, sometimes varicose veins, but pretty general surgery. And we were not taught to do much orthopedics, no neurosurgery, very little ENT and things like that. And it wasn't that we didn't choose to, we just weren't trained in that way, because we had plenty of specialists. We had neurosurgeons, we had ear, nose, and throat doctors, we had orthopedists, we had heart surgeons and various other things. That surplus is just not available here in Africa. I get caught in a position where the people have no alternative, and I have a little knowledge and I have a little experience, and I may try because the child has no other options.